Hello everyone. This week the skill we are talking about is words and phrases. Specifically, what are they? Why does it matter? How do I find the meaning of words and phrases? And how do I answer these kinds of test questions? Alright, so what do I need to know about an author's words and phrases? Well, specifically, we need to be able to figure out the meaning of words and phrases in a text. So this could be a bit difficult since language is hugely influenced by its subtlety of word meanings and associations. Both the definitions and connotations of a word influence its meaning in a sentence. A definition being, of course, the exact meaning of a word, as you would see in a dictionary, and the connotation being like an idea or a feeling or association that a word might suggest. And this would be involving like a specific culture or maybe an emotion. So to give an example of what a connotation would be, consider something the difference between childish, childlike, and youthful. Notice that those all three would have a very similar definition, but they would have different connotations. And specifically, a childish connotation would be it's a little more negative with that connotation if you're childish. Whereas a childlike is a bit more neutral, and youthful is kind of a positive connotation with that one, as you might appear young in that connotation. So both definitions and connotations affect the meaning of a word in context. To make things a little bit more confusing, authors can also use figurative language. So that would be in the form of like similes or metaphors, personification, hyperbole, things like that. And this is yet another way that a word and a phrase can add extra, unexpected meaning to a text. Okay, so what do words and phrases have to do with reading? Obviously, they have everything to do with reading because a passage is literally made up of words and phrases. Duh, right? But in all seriousness, being able to understand how a word and phrase is used in a passage will increase your reading comprehension and your depth of analysis. And yes, every single word can and will affect the meaning of a passage. If you do not believe me in this, I'm going to show you an example here. This is the chorus from the song Someone You Loved by Lewis Capaldi. Now the day bleeds into nightfall, and you're not here to get me through it all. I let my guard down, and then you pulled the rug. I was getting kinda used to being someone you loved. So some of you guys might recognize that song chorus. We're going to go ahead and look at one of the words that he uses in that chorus, which is the word bleeds. That is a very unique way to describe the sky becoming night, and though this is a subtle word usage, this word actually can have a powerful effect on the way that you understand what the author is going through, or the artist in this case. And you can kind of feel his hurt and pain and loneliness by thinking about the bleeding sky kind of a thing. So this is just one example of how a single word can add more meaning than you might expect. To sum up, words and phrases are important because they can affect your comprehension and analysis of a text. So how do we figure out the meaning of words and phrases? So now we know it's important and everything, so how do we actually figure it out? So there's a few things you can do. So first of all, if you do not know a word, if you are reading along in a text and you come across a word that you do not know, there's a few things that you can do to try to figure out what that word means. First of all, you could use context clues. You've probably heard of this before. That's just where you look at the sentence or sentences around the word, and you can try to figure out what the word means from there. So what is that word doing in the sentence, for example? Is it an action, a subject, or maybe it's a description word? Those are considered like parts of speech with verbs and nouns and things. And you can also see just of course, what the sentence is talking about will help you figure out what that word might mean. So here's an example. The dinosaur roared in absolute terror. It was a real behemoth of a creature. So you might be reading this sentence and you don't know what the word behemoth means, but you can check the context of this word, the sentences around it, and you can figure it out. So you see it's talking about a dinosaur, it's a terrifying dinosaur, it's roaring, and we also see that it describes the behemoth as a creature of some sort. So you could be right by thinking that this is some kind of giant monster. That could be the meaning of the word behemoth. And you would be right, that is the meaning of that word. So just by looking at the context, you can figure that out. Another way you can figure out a word meaning is you could check the parts of a word that you recognize. This is known as root words. So here's an example. I appreciate the phraseology the speaker used. You might have never seen that word before, phraseology, but you can still guess what it might mean. You could also see the context clues that it's saying a speaker and stuff like that, but we're going to look at the root words. So if we look at the word itself, phraseology, we see the word phrase is in there. You probably do know what the word phrase is, meaning like a group of words and stuff, and you also might know or be familiar with that ending, that suffix there, ology. Ology is kind of like the use of something or the study of something. So you might be able to guess that phraseology is like the use of the speaker's words. And you would be accurate in thinking that. And that is the definition of that. Okay, another option if you don't know the meaning of a word is you can substitute it for another word that you think might sound right. So in this example, the bug is infinitesimal. You can't even see it. You might think to yourself, well, if you can't see it, then maybe it's really small. So you think to substitute the word small. The bug is very small. You can't even see it. And that does make sense. It sounds right to my ears. So that's probably the meaning of the word infinitesimal. And the easiest way to find out the meaning of a word is to see if it has a definition right next to the word. Sometimes when you're reading, you'll see a little thing that is very helpful called a footnote. It has a little number next to it, and if it has a number, you know that you can look somewhere on the page for that number and it'll just define the word. So sometimes it can be even easier. Alright, so we're going to look now at words and phrases that you do know the definition of, but you might need to consider the use of this word in a specific sentence just because you need to know something a little deeper. So we're going to look at kind of how to go about doing that. First of all, you would want to identify basically those words. So what are the words that you should be looking at a little bit more deeply to consider what's going on? And one way that you can do that is just being able to say, like, is there a word in here that is being used in a strange way or in a context I wouldn't normally associate it with? So we'll look at this example and see if you can find the unique words. The ocean kissed the beach and the waves whispered poetry. I'm sure looking at this sentence, we can see that it is obviously talking about a beach and the ocean on the beach. So words like kissed and words like whispered and poetry are kind of some unique, strange words to be using in this sentence. So we can kind of think about those words and for the next part, ask yourself what kind of connotations these words might be having. So we can see kissed, whispered, and poetry can have connotations of being sweet or peaceful or thoughtful and beautiful. So you can kind of think through those words and see kind of what it's adding. Then finally, you can ask yourself what effect this word or phrase might be suggesting about the story. So for example, these specific words could add a calming mood to the current setting, and it could also slow you down to appreciate beauty and goodness and things like that. So that is some things that you could do to kind of find the words that you might, that you should be considering more. Alright, and lastly, how do I answer test questions about the meaning of words and phrases? So first of all, you want to always check the context of the sentence. This is super important, so please make sure you do this. Even if you think you know the definition of a word, that doesn't necessarily mean you will just automatically know the right answer, because words can be used very differently in different sentences. So you definitely need to check the context of where that word is being used. And secondly, you can use all the strategies we mentioned a minute ago to figure out the meaning of that word or phrase. So here is an example we can look at. What is the closest meaning of the word conscientious in the following line? He knew what he should do, so he was conscientious to act as a gentleman. So going through our strategies here, we could first of all, of course, look at the context. You could even do more than just looking at this one sentence. If we had a full passage, we could look at several sentences around this sentence just to be sure that we know the context of what it's talking about. But for this, for the purpose of this video, we'll just use the sentence it gave us. And you can find some context clues in this sentence itself. So I'm looking at things with the context of the sentence, like how it's talking about what he should do. That's a flag for me. And I'm also thinking about how he is wanting to act as a gentleman, which is a good way to act, of course. So he should do, act like a gentleman. I'm getting some ideas of what that word conscientious might mean. Second strategy we can go through, again, would be root words. So we can look at the word itself and say, okay, what do I see? Do I notice any words in that word that I recognize, any suffixes or anything? And I do see the word conscience in there. It's kind of like the word conscience. And I know the word conscience is kind of like a moral compass. It's your guide, I guess, to what is right and wrong. That's what a conscience is. And I also see that end part of the word, that suffix T-I-O-U-S, shus. And I know that's kind of meaning like full of something. So conscientious, I would think, would mean like full of conscience. So I can kind of guess that like full of good morals or something like that would be my guess of what that word means, just looking at the root words, even if I had never seen that word before. And thirdly, we can try to substitute that word. And what better ways to do that than looking at our words that it gives us. So it gives us annoyed, glad, ethical, and kind. So we'll try to use those in the sentence and see which one makes the most sense. So he knew what he should do, so he was annoyed to act as a gentleman. Annoyed does technically, grammatically make sense, but I feel like it doesn't really fit too much in this sentence in terms of making sense. It only grammatically makes sense. So we'll try the next one. He knew what he should do, so he was glad to act as a gentleman. This one I could see as being potentially correct. He might be glad to do what he should do, and act like a gentleman, so that could be an option. We'll go to this one, ethical. He knew what he should do, so he was ethical to act as a gentleman. That one makes a lot of sense to me based on our things that we came up earlier with things that he should do and kind of his moral compass and stuff like that. That's what ethical means. So I would assume that that would be the correct answer. But just for good practice, we're going to go ahead and look at D as well, kind. He knew what he should do, so he was kind to act as a gentleman. Again, that does make grammatical sense, and it does make a little bit of sense in terms of the sentence. But overall, I feel like the context clues and definitely the root words of conscientious is definitely pointing me toward C, ethical. And so that would be the answer I log in for that correct answer. Anyway, hopefully this video is helpful for you with figuring out the meaning of words and phrases, both in a text when you're trying to figure something out, and of course with test questions. And that's it for now, and see you next time.